Edgar Talbot pressed the sale papers flat against the fence post and touched the pen to the signature line. His hand didn't shake. That was the worst part. After everything, his hand didn't shake at all. 6 years of drought, 2 seasons of dead cattle, one father buried under the South Ridge, with nothing but a wooden cross and an unpaid banknote. He'd told himself this was the right thing. He touched the pen to paper. And that was the exact moment the crack split the morning wide open, sharp as a rifle shot, and a woman's voice followed it, steady and unafraid, like she had no idea what she'd just interrupted. If this story moves something in you, stay with me until the very end. Subscribe to this channel. Hit that notification bell and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The pen was still in Edgar Talbot's hand when he turned toward the sound. It had come from the road, that rutted, half-dead stretch of packed dirt that ran along the south edge of his property and eventually died out somewhere near the Millhaven turnoff. He hadn't heard a wagon on that road in 3 weeks. There was no reason for anyone to be on it. The Harlan Land Company's man, Denton Pierce, wasn't due until noon, and he always came from the north. Edgar set the pen down on top of the papers and walked toward the gate. The wagon had listed hard to the right. One of the rear wheels had cracked clean through the inner spoke, and the whole bed had dropped and dragged, gouging a long scar into the dirt where it had skidded. The horse, a gray mare, older, patient-looking, had stopped without being told, and stood with her head low, ears relaxed, like she had seen worse and knew better than to panic. The woman standing behind the wagon was not panicking either. She had her hands on the tailgate and was pushing, testing the weight, calculating something. She wasn't crying. She wasn't looking around for help. She was assessing the situation the same way a carpenter assesses a cracked beam, with her eyes, not her feelings. "Ma'am," Edgar said. She looked up. She was somewhere in her early 30s, maybe a year or two either side of his own age. Dark hair pulled back and pinned under a plain hat that had seen a lot of weather. A traveling dress the color of creek mud, practical and worn. Her face was not what he would call delicate. It was a face that had been outdoors most of its life, angular, direct, with brown eyes that didn't flutter away when they met his. "The spoke gave," she said. It was not an explanation. It was just a fact, delivered the way you deliver a fact to someone who can see it as plainly as you can. "I can see that," Edgar said. "I'm not going to be able to move it alone." "No, ma'am, you're not." She looked at him for a moment, not assessing him the way some women assessed a man looking for danger or looking for rescue. She was assessing whether he was useful. "You live here?" she asked, nodding toward the ranch house behind him. "I do." "For now, or?" "For now," he said. He hadn't meant to say it like that. Something in the way she'd framed the question had caught the truth before he could dress it up. She didn't press it. She looked back at the wheel. "If I can get something under the axle," she said, "and if we can get the mare moving forward slow, the weight should shift enough to drag it off the road. I'm not trying to fix it. I just need it out of the road, so another wagon doesn't come around that bend and hit us both." Edgar looked at the setup. She was right. It was a practical, reasonable plan. It would also take 2 people, and would most likely ruin whatever was left of the wheel rim. "There's a post from my fence repair last week," he said. "In the barn. Should be the right thickness to wedge under there." "That'll work," she said. She didn't say thank you yet. He noticed that. Most women, most people would have said it reflexively the moment he offered. She said it when the work was done, and she said it once plainly without decoration. He would remember that later. He would think about it when he couldn't sleep. They got the fence post under the axle between them, and she took the mare's bridle and walked her forward, slow and steady, talking to the horse the whole time in a low voice. And the wagon dragged itself another 8 feet off the road and came to rest against the scrub grass on the far shoulder. It had taken maybe 20 minutes. When it was done, she took her hat off and pressed her wrist to her forehead and looked at what they'd managed. "Where were you headed?" Edgar asked. "Millhaven. I've got a cousin there. Or I had one." She put her hat back on. "He died 4 months ago. Left me a letter saying I should come anyway, that there was still the boarding house plan if I wanted to see it through." "Is there still the plan?" She looked at him sideways. That's what I intend to find out. He almost smiled. He couldn't quite remember the last time something had almost made him smile. You're not from around here, he said. Colorado, near Gunnison. I had a ranch there with my husband. Had. He died 3 years back. Pneumonia. He had it for 6 days and then he was gone. She said it without flinching, but without the flat performance of someone who has rehearsed not flinching. She said it the way a woman says something she has made peace with mostly. I kept the ranch going for 2 years after. Then the bank decided I wasn't a reliable borrower and called the note, and that was that. Edgar was quiet. Don't look at me like that, she said. Like what? Like I'm something broken that needs handling. I'm not. I'm just explaining why I'm on this road with a cracked wheel and no backup plan. I wasn't looking at you like that, Edgar said. She studied him. No, she said after a moment. Maybe you weren't. He glanced back at the house. The sale papers were still on the fence post where he'd left them. He could see the edge of them from here, white against the weathered wood, one corner lifting and settling in the light wind. Denton Pierce would be here in 4 hours. You're welcome to use my barn while you figure out the wheel, Edgar said. My horse can take you into Millhaven if you need to get there today, and I can have the wheel looked at in the meantime. She was quiet for a moment, looking at the road ahead, calculating again. I don't want to put you out, she said. You're not putting me out. I've got nothing pressing today that can't wait. That was a lie, but he said it so easily that it almost convinced him too. All right, she said. Thank you. She said it once. Plain. He took the mare's lead and walked the wagon into his yard, and Louise Bishop followed. Her name was Louise. She told him that herself before he thought to ask the way a person introduces themselves when they're not embarrassed to take up space in a room or a yard or a stranger's life. Edgar Talbot, he said, and shook her hand. She shook it back firmly. Not performing firmness, just having it. He got her settled with water for the mare and then went about unhitching the horse properly, while Louise walked around the wagon bed, checking her supplies, checking, not inventorying. There was a difference. She wasn't counting what she had. She was making sure nothing had broken loose when the wheel gave. You're good with horses, he said. He had watched her with the mare on the road. She didn't spook once. Pepper doesn't spook easy, Louise said, and I don't give her reason to. What do you do when she spooks? I stay calm, she said. That's the whole trick. Most animals, most people, they'll take their cues from whoever's steadiest in the room. You stay calm, they calm down. You panic, everybody panics. Edgar considered that. That's true, he said. It's not a philosophy, she said. It's just practical. He tied Pepper in the shade and went to the house to get water and whatever was left of the morning biscuits. And when he came back, Louise was sitting on the wagon tongue with her hat in her hands, looking at the ranch house, the way people look at old photographs, not with longing exactly, but with a kind of recognition. It was a good house once, Edgar said. It's still a good house, she said. It just needs someone to believe it is. He handed her the water canteen. She drank and handed it back. You said for now, she said, when I asked if you lived here. He sat down on the water trough rail across from her. I did. You're leaving. I've been trying to leave for about 6 months, he said. Today's the day I finally do it, or was going to be. She waited. He didn't know why he told her. He hadn't told anyone, not the pastor, not the 2 ranch hands who'd quit in the spring when he stopped paying them on time, not the banker in Millhaven who'd looked at him with that particular kind of pity that felt worse than contempt. But something about the way Louise Bishop waited patient, undemanding like she had all the time in the world and no investment in what he said made the words come out. My father died 14 months ago, Edgar said. He built this ranch, worked it for 30 years. When he was alive, it was the best-run small operation in this part of Wyoming. Good cattle, good water, decent soil. The man knew what he was doing. And after? Louise asked. After. Edgar looked at his hands. The drought came the year before he got sick. We lost a third of the herd the first summer, and he was already too weak to do what needed doing. And I wasn't him. I'm not him. I kept thinking if I just worked harder, did it longer, figured out the right combination of things, the land would come back. The cattle would come back. He stopped. It didn't. So you sold. I signed with the Harlan Land Company. They want the water rights. Mostly there's a creek on the south edge that doesn't dry up even in the worst of it. They'll get the land and the house and the creek, and they'll probably run a rail spur across the north field and build something I wouldn't recognize. He paused. Their man's coming at noon to finalize. Louise looked at the papers still on the fence post. She hadn't mentioned them before. He hadn't noticed she'd noticed them. Is that what you want? She asked. It doesn't matter what I want, Edgar said. What I want died with my father and the 2 dry summers we had after. That's not what I asked you, she said. He looked at her. I asked if it was what you want, Louise said. Not what you have, not what's practical, what you want. Nobody had asked him that. In 14 months of lawyers and land agents and bankers and a preacher who'd said the Lord works in mysterious ways with the confidence of a man who'd never lost anything worth keeping, nobody had asked him what he wanted. He didn't answer her. She didn't push. She put her hat back on and stood up. I can look at the wheel while you get ready for your meeting, she said. I know something about wagon repair. I'm not going to promise I can fix it, but I can tell you what it needs. You don't have to do that, Edgar said. I know I don't, she said. Show me where you keep your tools. She couldn't fix the wheel. But she was right that she knew something about wagon repair because she looked at it for 10 minutes, running her hands along the split spokes and the cracked rim. And when she was done, she told him exactly what was wrong and exactly what it would take to fix it. 3 new spokes, a section of steel rim repair, and a man who knew what he was doing with a forge. There's a smithy in Millhaven, Edgar said. Then that's where I need to be, she said. But not today. The mayor needs to rest, and frankly, so do I. She said it without apology. If it's not too much trouble, I'll camp at the edge of your property tonight and head to town in the morning. I can ride Pepper bareback if I need to. You'll do no such thing, Edgar said. The words came out sharper than he intended. She raised an eyebrow. I mean, you can use the house. There's a spare room. It's dusty, but it's a room. She looked at him for a long moment. I don't want charity, she said. It isn't charity. I've got a broken wagon in my yard and a woman who needs a roof. That's hospitality, not charity. There's a difference. In my experience, charity is when you give something to someone who can't give anything back. Hospitality is just common decency. Louise was quiet. Then, your father teach you that? My mother, he said. She died 6 years ago. Something shifted in Louise's face. Not pity, he was grateful for that. Something more like recognition. Mine too, she said. 8 years. Fever. They stood there for a moment with that between them, the way people stand with a shared loss, not leaning on each other, just acknowledging that the weight is real. All right, Louise said. I'll take the room. I'll be gone by first light tomorrow. Denton Pierce arrived at noon exactly. He was a thin man with a good suit and a leather case, and the kind of careful smile that men wear when they've already won and are just being gracious about it. Mr. Talbot, he said, climbing down from his buggy and looking at the wagon in the yard with mild curiosity. You have company. A traveler with a broken wheel, Edgar said. She'll be gone tomorrow. Pierce opened his case on the fence post where the sale papers were already waiting. He set out 2 more documents alongside them, clean and official, with the Harlan Land Company seal pressed into the lower corner. Everything's in order, Pierce said. Once you sign these 3, the land transfers on the 1st of next month. You'll have 30 days to vacate and collect your personal effects. He paused. I want you to know, Mr. Talbot, that the company appreciates your willingness to move forward. This land will be well used. By whom? Edgar asked. Pierce hesitated. By the company's interests, of course. Agricultural development. Possibly rail access. Possibly. Mr. Talbot, how many ranches has your company bought in the last 2 years? Edgar asked. Pierce's smile didn't move. I'm not sure that's relevant to... I heard the Carver place sold last spring, Edgar said. And the Whitmore operation before that. And the Dunmore family sold their water rights and then found out they couldn't run cattle without them and had to sell the land too. He looked at Pierce. That's 3 ranches in 18 months, all within 40 miles of here. Land changes hands, Pierce said smoothly. That's the nature of... What are you building? Edgar asked. I'm sorry. What is the Harlan Land Company actually building? Because you don't buy water rights for agricultural development. You buy water rights when you're planning something that needs a lot of water that isn't cattle. Pierce's smile thinned. Mr. Talbot, I assure you the company's plans are entirely... What are you building? He heard footsteps behind him. He didn't turn. He knew it was Louise. He recognized the sound of her boots, now that particular even stride. Is everything all right? She asked. Fine, Edgar said, still looking at Pierce. Pierce looked at Louise, then back at Edgar. Whatever he saw in Edgar's face made him recalibrate. The papers are ready whenever you are, Pierce said quietly. Take your time. He stepped back to his buggy and produced a cigarette and lit it with the ease of a man who was certain of the outcome and not in any particular hurry. Edgar stared at the papers. 3 signatures. 3 clean lines with his name already printed below each one. You don't have to decide right now, Louise said low and even beside him. The decision was made, he said. Decisions unmake themselves sometimes, she said. That's why they call it a decision and not a fact. He looked at her. Her brown eyes were steady, not pushing him, not pulling him. Just there, clear and level, the way a person is when they're telling the truth. You don't know anything about this land, he said. No, she agreed. But I know the look of a man who's about to do something he'll regret. Maybe I'll regret not doing it. Maybe, she said. But you'd know which regret is which, wouldn't you? And right now, looking at you, I know which one's heavier. Edgar stood at the fence post with the pen in his hand for a long time. Behind him, he could hear Pierce smoking. He could hear Pepper shifting in the shade. He could hear the wind coming off the south field, dry and familiar, moving through the long grass the way it had always moved, the way it had moved when his father stood in that same yard and breathed in deep and said, "This is our son. Don't you ever forget it." He set the pen down. "I need more time," he told Pierce. Pierce turned. His expression did not change, but something behind his eyes did. "Mr. Talbot, the company's offer has a..." "I know it has a deadline," Edgar said. "And I'm telling you, I need more time before the end of that deadline. That's my right." Pierce looked at the papers, at Edgar, at Louise briefly with something that might have been irritation. "I'll expect to hear from you by end of week," Pierce said. "You will," Edgar said. "One way or another." Pierce repacked his case, climbed back into his buggy, and drove off down the north road without another word. Edgar stood at the fence post for a while after the buggy disappeared. The papers were still there. The pen was still there. His signature was still on the first one. He didn't know what he'd just done. "Thank you," Louise said from behind him. He turned. "For what? I haven't done anything yet." "No," she said. "But you stopped." She paused. "Sometimes stopping is the hardest thing." He looked at the ranch house, at the barn where Pepper was resting, at the south field stretching out toward the creek he couldn't see from here but knew was there, running low, but running it always ran, no matter how dry the summers got. He looked at all of it like a man who is seeing something he thought he had already said goodbye to. "Come on," he said finally. "I'll get that spare room ready, and there's supper to think about." Louise fell into step beside him, and they walked back toward the house together. Not close, not touching, just walking at the same pace the way two people walk when they've already learned something important about each other without meaning to. Behind them, the sale papers lifted in the wind, settled, and lifted again. Supper was leftover salt pork and cold biscuits from the morning, and Edgar didn't apologize for it. Louise didn't expect him to. She ate what was on her plate and poured herself water from the pitcher on the table, and neither of them spoke for the first few minutes, and it wasn't the uncomfortable kind of silence. It was the kind that happens between two people who are each thinking hard and don't feel the need to fill the air with noise while they do it. It was Louise who broke it. "How much did they offer you?" she asked. Edgar looked up. "The land company," she said. "How much?" he told her. She put her fork down. "Edgar," she said carefully, "that's less than half what this land is worth." "The land isn't worth much right now. 2 years of drought." "The land isn't worth much," she said. "But the water is." She leaned forward. "You said yourself the creek doesn't run dry, not even in the worst of it. Do you know what that's worth to a railroad operation?" He was quiet. "Because I do," she said. "In Colorado, a creek like that reliable year-round water on land that a rail line wants to cross. Edgar, they're not offering you what the land is worth. They're offering you what they think you'll take." He set his fork down. "You know something about rail operations?" he said. "I know something about what happened to my neighbors in Gunnison County," she said. 3 ranches in 2 years. All sold for less than they were worth. All sold to a land acquisition company with a name that sounded respectable and papers that looked clean. She looked at him. "What's the full name of the company that Pierce works for?" "Harlan Land Company," he said. "Out of Cheyenne." The color didn't leave her face, but something behind her eyes went very still. "What?" Edgar said. "In Colorado," she said slowly. "The company that bought out my neighbors called itself the Harlan Development Group." She paused. "Out of Denver." The room went quiet enough that Edgar could hear the wind against the window glass. "That could be a coincidence," he said. "It could be," she said. "But the man who came to my neighbor Walt Greer's door, the man who made the offer, who was so polite and so patient and so reasonable, his name was Pierce, too." She looked at Edgar directly. "Denton Pierce." Edgar pushed back from the table. He stood up and walked to the window. Not to look at anything, just to move because staying still felt impossible. "Tell me what happened to your neighbors," he said. Louise told him. It took a while. She told it plain without embellishment. The way she did everything Walt Greer had sold, under pressure, told himself he was making the smart decision, moved his family to Pueblo. The Aldecoa family had held out longer and found that 2 of their fence lines were cut 3 times in a single month, their water trough poisoned with something that killed 4 head of cattle, and an unsigned letter delivered to their door suggesting that accidents happen to stubborn people. They sold within the week. The Perkins widow, a woman of 62, who had worked that land for 30 years, had refused entirely, hired a lawyer, and discovered that someone had filed a competing land claim against her in the county records. A claim that appeared legitimate. A claim that her own lawyer said would take 2 years and more money than she had to fight. She sold. "She cried the whole time she was signing," Louise said. "I was there. She held the pen and she cried and she signed, and the Pierce man stood there with that careful smile and waited and didn't say a word." Edgar turned around. "Why didn't you tell me this afternoon?" he said. "When Pierce was standing right there." "Because I didn't know it was the same Pierce," she said. "I didn't know until you said the company name just now." She met his eyes. "And because you hadn't asked me yet." He stared at her. "You were going to let me sign those papers." "No," she said quietly. "That's why I came outside." He thought about that. He thought about her standing beside him at the fence post saying, "You stopped," and sometimes stopping is the hardest thing. He thought about how she'd come out at exactly the right moment, said exactly the right words. "Louise," he said, "why were you on that road this morning?" She looked at him steadily. "My wheel broke." "On a road that nobody uses, coming from the direction of open country, not from any town." "I told you I was coming from Colorado," he said. "You would have come through Millhaven first. The road you were on doesn't connect to anything coming from the south. It runs east to west along my property line, and it starts at the Carver place." He paused. The Carver place that the Harlan Land Company bought 8 months ago. The silence stretched. I was at the Carver place, Louise said finally. Edgar waited. She put both hands flat on the table. My cousin Tom didn't just leave me a letter, she said. He left me documents. Records he'd kept for 2 years of every transaction the Harlan Company made in this county. Every purchase, every threatened rancher, every suspicious transfer. He was a bookkeeper before he came out here a good one. He knew what fraud looked like in a ledger, and he knew what he was looking at when the Harlan Company started buying up land around Millhaven. She stopped. He died 4 months ago. The doctor said it was his heart. But you don't believe that, Edgar said. Tom was 41 years old, she said. He didn't drink. He didn't smoke. He walked 3 miles every morning since he was a young man. Her voice didn't waver, but her jaw tightened. No, I don't believe that. Edgar sat back down. He sat across from her and put his elbows on the table and looked at her for a long time. You came here to finish what he started, he said. I came here to get his documents from where he'd hidden them on the Carver property, she said, and to find someone in this county who still had something to lose, someone who hadn't signed yet, and show them what I had. And you found me, Edgar said. Your wheel broke you, she said. I found you by accident. My wheel? He stopped. My gate is the first one on this road after the Carver property. Yes, she said. So if your wheel hadn't broken when it did, I would have kept going, she said. And you would have signed those papers at noon, and by now Denton Pierce would be halfway back to Cheyenne. Edgar looked at the table, at his own hands, at the grain of the wood that his father had built this table from hand-planed and fitted without a single nail in the joints, the way his father had done everything slow and careful and meant to last. Where are the documents? He said. In my wagon, she said. Hidden in the false bottom of the supply box. Tom built it himself. She paused. I want you to look at them. You were a rancher's son. You know what proper land records look like. I know what the numbers tell me, but I need someone who knows this county, these properties, these families. And then what? Edgar asked. And then we take them to a lawyer, she said. Or a federal land office, or both. That takes money, Edgar said. I don't have much left. I know, she said. Neither do I. She looked at him evenly. But I have the documents, and you have the land, and right now tonight that's more than either of us had this morning. Edgar was quiet for a moment. Then he stood up, picked up both their plates, and went to the wash basin. We'll look at the documents in the morning, he said, in proper light. All right, Louise said. And Louise, he turned. If you'd walked past my gate today, if your wheel had held another 100 yards, I would have signed. You know that. She looked at him. I know, she said quietly. He nodded once and turned back to the basin. Neither of them said anything else about it that night. He didn't sleep. He lay on his back in the dark and stared at the ceiling and thought about everything Louise had told him, and then he stopped thinking about it and just lay there with the weight of it, which was something different from thinking. Thinking you could organize. Weight you just had to carry until your body got used to it. Sometime after midnight he heard something. It was not a loud sound. That was what made him sit up. Loud sounds on a ranch at night were animals, coyotes, the creak of the barn settling. Pepper shifting her weight. This was a small sound, a deliberate sound, the kind a man makes when he's trying not to make any. Edgar was out of bed before he was fully awake, moving the way a man moves who grew up knowing that silence in the wrong place means trouble. He didn't light the lamp. He pulled on his boots and took the rifle from beside the door and went to the window first. There was a horse at the edge of his property, just standing there in the dark. No buggy, just a horse and a man sitting on it not moving, watching the house. Edgar went into the hall. Louise's door was closed. He tapped it twice quiet. It opened in seconds. She was dressed. She hadn't undressed at all. I heard it too, she whispered. Man on a horse at the east edge, he said. Just watching? How long? Don't know. He was there when I woke up. Louise moved to the hall window and looked out without touching the curtain. After a moment, she stepped back. "He's not here to do anything tonight," she said. "If he were, he'd have done it already. He's here to let us know he's watching." "Pierce sent him," Edgar said. "Pierce didn't waste any time," she said. "Which means we're right about what those documents are worth." Edgar looked at her. "You're not scared?" "I'm terrified," she said very calmly. "But being terrified and being scared are different things. Scared makes you freeze. Terrified makes you think faster." He almost said something about that. He decided against it. "The documents," he said. "We need to get them into the house." "In the dark with someone watching," she said. "Yes," she thought for a moment. Then, "Your barn is connected to the yard. If I go out through the kitchen and take the long way around the water trough, he won't have a clear line of sight until I'm almost at the wagon, and by then, I'll already be there." "I'll go," Edgar said. "You don't know where the false bottom is?" "Then tell me." "It's a fitted panel on the left side of the supply box," she said. "You press on the right corner and slide left." "But Edgar." She put her hand on his arm, not grabbing, just there. "He'll see you before you get to the wagon. He'll know we found the documents." "He already knows we're talking," Edgar said. "He already knows something changed today when I didn't sign. Me going to the barn in the middle of the night doesn't tell him anything he hasn't already guessed." She looked at him. "Go," she said. "I'll keep watch." He went out through the kitchen, moving quiet and easy, not rushing, because a man walking fast across his own yard at night looks guilty, and a man walking slow looks like he just heard something in the barn. He crossed to the barn door and went inside, and in the dark he found the wagon. By feel the tailgate, the side panel, the supply box mounted on the left. He pressed the right corner of the panel and slid it left. His fingers found the bundle immediately. Thick papers wrapped in oilcloth and tied with cord. Heavy enough that he knew without opening it that Louise's cousin Tom had spent a long time on this. A careful man's life's work, hidden in a wagon box, smuggled across 2 states by a woman who had lost everything and kept going anyway. He tucked it under his arm and walked back to the house. When he came in through the kitchen, Louise was at the hall window. "Still there?" he asked. "Still there," she said. "He'll leave before dawn. They always leave before dawn. They don't want to be seen in daylight." "They," Edgar said. She turned. "This isn't the first time someone has watched a house I was sleeping in," she said. "In Gunnison, after Tom sent me the first letter about the documents, I had someone watching my house for 2 weeks." She paused. "That's when I started not undressing at night." Edgar looked at her. This woman standing in his hallway in the dark with her hat still on and her boots laced and her eyes clear and steady, watching the window, like it was just another thing to be assessed and dealt with. "You've been carrying this alone for a long time," he said. "I have," she said. Simply. No performance of strength, no performance of hardship, just a statement of fact. "You're not alone now," Edgar said. Louise looked at him. The lamplight from the kitchen caught the side of her face. She didn't say thank you this time. She just nodded once, small and real, and turned back to the window. They stayed like that until the rider at the edge of the property turned his horse and disappeared into the dark, slow and unhurried, the way a man moves when he wants you to know he's not afraid of you. Edgar watched him go and felt something shift inside him that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the particular kind of fury that comes when a man finally understands fully and completely exactly what has been done to him and exactly how much he wants to fight back. He set the oilcloth bundle on the kitchen table. "First light," he said. "We open it." "First light," Louise agreed. The oilcloth bundle smelled like cedar and old ink. And when Edgar untied the cord and spread the papers across the kitchen table, the first thing he noticed was how many of them there were. Tom Bishop had been thorough. Thorough the way a man is when he knows nobody is going to believe him without proof, so he makes sure there is enough proof that nobody can argue with it. Page after page of figures, dates, property descriptions, transaction records, and handwritten notes in a small, precise hand that Edgar could see immediately had belonged to a careful man. A man who knew exactly what he was looking at and exactly why it mattered. "Your cousin was a good bookkeeper," Edgar said. "He was the best I ever knew," Louise said. She was standing beside him, not touching the papers yet, letting him go through them first. He could look at a set of numbers and tell you in 5 minutes whether someone was lying. He said most fraud is just arithmetic. People think it's complicated, but it's just arithmetic that somebody hoped you wouldn't check. Edgar picked up the first sheet. It was a transaction record, the Carver property. Date of sale, amount paid, name of purchasing entity, Harlan Land Company, registered in Cheyenne, Wyoming. Below it in Tom's small handwriting, assessed value per county records, $4,200. Sale price $1,800. Differential $2,400. Note: county assessment updated 3 months prior to sale. Previous assessment $6,100. Who filed the revision? Edgar set it down and picked up the next one. The Whitmore operation. Same structure. Assessed value revised downward before the sale. Sale price dramatically below even the revised assessment. Tom's note. Sheriff Aldous Crane signed the revised assessment document. Crane has no authority under Wyoming land statute to revise property assessments. That authority belongs to the county clerk. This signature is either fraudulent or Crane was acting under instruction from someone who needed him to. "Louise," Edgar said. "I see it," she said. He kept going. The Dunmore family, the ones who'd sold the water rights and then lost everything. Tom had a copy of their original water rights deed, and beside it, he'd placed a copy of the transfer document. Edgar read the transfer document 3 times before he found it. "This says the water rights transfer was voluntary and independent of the land sale," he said slowly. "Yes," Louise said. "But the Dunmores told everyone they had no choice, that without the water rights, the cattle couldn't—" "Read the date on the transfer," Louise said. Edgar looked. The water rights transfer had been dated 6 weeks before the land sale. Not after, before. "They signed away the water rights 6 weeks before they sold the land," Edgar said. "Under what pressure, we don't know," Louise said. "But they signed the water rights over first, and then when they tried to keep the land without water, they couldn't, and then they sold the land too." She paused. "It's a 2-step. Get the water first. Once they don't have water, the land is worthless, and they'll take anything you offer." Edgar felt something cold move through him. He reached for the papers at the bottom of the stack, the ones Tom had put last, which meant he'd gathered them last, which meant they were the most recent. He found his own name on the 3rd page from the bottom. Talbot property. Edgar Talbot sole heir, following death of Robert Talbot, March 1884. Current status outstanding banknote, $340, Millhaven Savings. Note held by. Edgar stopped reading. He read it again. The banknote on his property. The $340 he'd been scrambling to service for 14 months, the debt that had been part of why selling had felt like the only option. The note was held by the Millhaven Savings Bank. He knew that. He'd always known that. But Tom had written in small letters beside the bank's name, Millhaven Savings majority shareholder, as of January 1884, Harlan Development Group, Denver. The room was absolutely silent. "Edgar," Louise said carefully. "They own the bank," he said. "They own enough of it," she said. "The bank that holds my note." He set the paper down. He picked it up again. "They bought into the bank and then called my note early. They called it 14 months ago, 2 months after my father died." "Which is what drove you to sell," Louise said. He looked at her. "They killed the ranch," he said. "Not the drought, not bad management. They killed it deliberately, so you'd have to sell." She was steady, clear-eyed, giving him the truth without softening it. "The drought was real, Edgar. I'm not saying that. But a manageable drought becomes a crisis when your bank suddenly calls your note and won't extend terms. That's not bad luck. That's pressure." Edgar stood up. He walked to the window. He stood there with his back to her and his hands at his sides, and he was quiet for a long time. "My father knew something was wrong," he said finally. "The last 6 months before he got sick, He was different, quiet in a way he hadn't been before. He started keeping the ledger himself, instead of letting the bank manage the accounts. I thought it was just the drought wearing on him. He stopped. I thought I'd failed him. I thought the ranch was failing because of me. It wasn't because of you, Louise said. I know that now. His voice was level, but tight. I know that now. He turned around. Tom's notes, he said. Is there anything in there about what they're actually planning? What they need all this land for? Louise reached into the stack and pulled out a folded paper from the very bottom, the last thing Tom had documented the most recent date on anything in the bundle. She unfolded it and spread it on the table. It was a survey map, hand-copied, not official, but detailed. Edgar recognized the creek, the property lines, the Millhaven Road. Tom had drawn in a dotted line that ran from the northwest corner of the Carver property, crossed the Whitmore land, cut directly across the south field of the Talbot Ranch, and continued toward Millhaven. That's a rail line, Edgar said. That's the planned route, Louise said. Tom found a reference to it in a Denver business filing. Harlan Development Group filed for a railroad right-of-way survey permit in January. The route goes directly through every property they've been acquiring. She pointed to the dotted line where it crossed the Talbot South Field. And directly over your creek. Edgar stared at the map. This is worth 10 times what they offered me, he said. More, Louise said quietly. A reliable water source on a rail line route in dry country, Edgar. They'd be supplying water to every steam locomotive that runs through this territory. The value isn't in the land. The value is in what the land allows them to do. She paused. Tom figured the real value of the Talbot water rights alone at somewhere between $40,000 and $60,000. The number landed like a stone dropped from a height. $40,000 to $60,000. For land, he'd been about to sign away for less than $2,000. He sat down hard in the chair. I want to be angry, he said. I am angry, but I'm also... He stopped. Sitting with the size of it, Louise said. Yes. I know, she said. I sat with it for 4 months alone. It doesn't get smaller. You just get bigger. He looked at her. She was leaning on the table with both hands flat, looking at the map, and in the early morning light coming through the window, she looked like what she was, a woman who had carried something enormous for a very long time and had not put it down, who had come a long way alone on bad roads, who had lost a cousin and a ranch and a husband and still had both hands flat on the table and her eyes open and her mind working. He didn't say what he was thinking. He filed it away and went back to the papers. That was when someone knocked on the door. Edgar was on his feet before the second knock. Louise swept the papers into a stack and wrapped the oilcloth around them in 4 seconds. Practiced fast, no wasted movement, and pushed them behind the flour bin under the counter. Edgar opened the door. It was not Pierce. It was an old man, 70 at least, short and lean, with a weathered face and eyes that were sharp under heavy brows. He was holding his hat in both hands and looking at Edgar with the expression of a man who has been arguing with himself about something for a while and has finally decided to stop arguing and just do the thing. You're Robert Talbot's boy, the old man said. It was not a question. I am, Edgar said. Edgar Talbot. I know who you are. I knew your father for 22 years. He looked past Edgar into the kitchen, saw Louise, and looked back at Edgar. My name is Henry Carver. I sold my property to the Harlan Company 8 months ago, and I have been sorry every day since. Edgar stepped back from the door. Come in, he said. Henry Carver sat at the kitchen table and put his hat on his knee and looked at Edgar and Louise with the focused attention of a man who doesn't have time to waste. I heard Pierce was out here yesterday, he said. I've still got friends in Millhaven. Word travels. He glanced at the flour bin, and Edgar had the distinct impression the old man knew exactly what was behind it. I came to tell you something your father told me 3 weeks before he died. Louise was very still. He said he'd found something wrong with the bank records, Henry said. He said someone had been filing false liens against ranches in this county, paper liens, not real ones, but official enough, looking to scare people into selling. He said he had a name. He stopped. He died before he could do anything with it. What name? Edgar said. A lawyer, Henry said. "Based in Cheyenne. Name of Gilmore, Calvin Gilmore. He's the one who files the paperwork. He's the one who makes it all look legal." He looked at Edgar steadily. "Your father was going to write to the federal land office in Cheyenne. He never got the chance." "He was going to fight them," Edgar said. "He was going to fight them," Henry said. "Your father was not a man who went down without a fight. Don't you ever believe he was?" Edgar felt something move through his chest that had no name. Not grief exactly, and not relief exactly, but something that was both at once the feeling of understanding something you had misunderstood for a long time. "Why are you telling me this now?" Edgar asked. "You already sold." "Because I am 82 years old," Henry said. "And because I was a coward when it mattered, and I am too old to die a coward." He reached into his coat and produced an envelope. "This is a signed statement. Everything I just told you written down and signed. Your father's words as best as I can remember them, and what I know about what was done to my property before I sold." He put it on the table. "I also know 2 other families who'll sign. The Aldecos and the Perkins widow. She's back in the territory, living with her daughter in Millhaven. She has been waiting for someone to start this fight." Edgar picked up the envelope. Louise looked at Henry. "Mr. Carver," she said. "Do you know a lawyer, a trustworthy one in Millhaven or anywhere near here?" "There's a man named Sutton in Laramie," Henry said. "He doesn't like the Harlan people. He's had 2 clients who tried to fight them and lost for lack of evidence." He looked at the flour bin again, plainly this time. If somebody gave him the right kind of evidence, I reckon he'd move fast. The knock on the door came hard, and without warning, 3 heavy strikes, the kind that aren't asking permission. Edgar was at the door before Louise could speak. He opened it. Denton Pierce stood on the porch. He was not smiling this time. Behind him, 2 steps back and to the right, stood the largest man Edgar had seen in years, broad through the shoulders, arms at his sides, watching Edgar the way a dog watches a gate to see if it's going to swing open. "Mr. Talbot," Pierce said, "I think we need to have a direct conversation." "We're having one," Edgar said. Pierce's eyes moved past Edgar to Henry Carver sitting at the table. Something in his expression shifted, not quite surprise, but recognition, and something harder than recognition. "Henry," Pierce said pleasantly. Henry Carver stood up very slowly, put his hat on, and looked at Pierce, the way an old man looks at something he has been afraid of for 8 months and has decided today he is not afraid of anymore. "Denton," Henry said. Pierce looked back at Edgar. "I'm going to make you one more offer," Pierce said. "A better one, out of respect for your father's legacy and the time you've given this." He reached into his jacket and produced a new envelope. "Double the original figure, cash within 7 days, but the deadline is now Friday. Not end of week, not whenever you're ready. Friday morning. After that the offer disappears and we proceed through other channels." "Other channels," Edgar said. "Legal ones," Pierce said. "Smooth as river water. The company has options it hasn't exercised yet. I'd prefer we didn't have to exercise them." Edgar looked at the envelope. He looked at the large man standing behind Pierce. He looked at Pierce's face, that careful smile, that patient certainty, the expression of a man who has never once had to worry about whether he'd win. "You sent someone to watch this house last night," Edgar said. Pierce blinked. One small, controlled blink. "I don't know what you're—" "Yes, you do," Edgar said. "And I want you to know that I saw him. And I want you to know that I am not the man who almost signed your papers yesterday morning." He looked at Pierce directly, without heat, without performance. Just clear and steady and certain, the way his father had been certain of things. "Take your envelope back, and tell whoever you send to watch this property tonight that I will be watching back." Pierce was quiet for a moment. The large man behind him had not moved. "Friday, Mr. Talbot," Pierce said. He did not take the envelope back. He set it against the door frame and turned and walked away, and the large man turned with him, and they walked to the buggy without hurrying the way men walk when they want you to know they are not scared of you either. Edgar closed the door. He stood with his back against it and looked at Louise and Henry at the kitchen table. Louise had the oilcloth bundle back on the table already unwrapped, and she was looking at him with something in her face that was not quite admiration and not quite fear, and was something that sat between the two, the expression of a person watching someone discover who they actually are. "Friday," Henry said. "That's 3 days." "I know," Edgar said. He pushed off the door and came back to the table. "Then we have 3 days," he said. "Tell me everything you know about Sutton and Laramie." Henry Carver knew James Sutton the way men know each other in small territories, not well, but reliably. He'd used Sutton once in a boundary dispute 15 years back, and had found him to be the kind of lawyer who read every word of every document before he opened his mouth, which Henry said was rarer than it should have been. "He's in Laramie," Henry said. 2 hours ride if the road's dry. But I don't know that you want to leave this property right now." "I don't," Edgar said. "But I need him here." "I can ride," Louise said. Both men looked at her. "I rode to Gunnison alone twice when my husband was sick and couldn't leave the ranch," she said. "I can manage 2 hours on a road I've never been on." She paused. "And whoever Pierce sends to watch the property tonight is going to be watching for you, Edgar. Not for me. I'm just a woman with a broken wagon." There was something in the way she said it, dry, precise, completely without self-pity, that made Edgar want to argue with it and made him understand at the same time that she was right. "Take my horse," he said. "Pepper needs another day's rest." "All right." "And Louise." He looked at her. "If anything feels wrong on that road." "I've been managing wrong roads for 3 years, she said. "I'll be fine." She was saddled and gone within 20 minutes, and the yard felt different without her in it, in a way Edgar didn't examine too closely. Henry stayed. He sat at the kitchen table and drank the coffee Edgar made and looked at Tom's documents with the focused expression of a man doing penance. "I should have said something 8 months ago," Henry said. "You were alone," Edgar said. "So was she." He nodded toward the road Louise had taken. "She came alone from Colorado with a wagon full of evidence and no backup plan and knocked on a stranger's gate." He shook his head. "I had no excuse." "You're here now," Edgar said. "I'm here now," Henry said. But he didn't say it like it was enough. He said it like a man who knows the difference between what he did and what he should have done and is learning to live in the space between them. Edgar went back to the documents. The more he read, the clearer the picture became, and the clearer the picture became, the more his jaw tightened. Tom Bishop hadn't just recorded the transactions. He'd traced the money. Shell company to holding company to subsidiary, back to the Harlan parent organization in Denver, a paper trail that took 12 steps, but arrived every time at the same place. And at the center of it all, repeated again and again in transaction records and authorization signatures, was one name, Calvin Gilmore, attorney at law, Cheyenne, the lawyer who made it look legal, the lawyer his father had found. Edgar was on the 6th page of Gilmore's filings when he stopped. He read the page again. Then he stood up. "Henry," he said, "look at this." Henry came around the table and looked where Edgar was pointing. Gilmore had filed a lien against the Talbot property in December of 1883, 4 months before Robert Talbot died. A lien that Edgar had never been told about. A lien that appeared in the county records but had never been served, never formally notified, never. "That's not legal," Henry said. "You can't file a lien against a man's property without notifying him. That's basic property law." "But it's in the county records," Edgar said. "Which means if someone runs a title search on this land, they'd find an undisclosed lien, and the sale would be complicated," Henry said slowly. "Unless the buyer already knew about it. Unless the buyer was the same entity that filed it." Edgar set the page down. "They filed a false lien against my father's land 4 months before he died," he said, "which would have shown up when my father tried to refinance or restructure the banknote, which would have made the bank's position worse and increased the pressure on him. Which would have, He stopped talking. Henry put a hand on his shoulder. Brief, firm, and then gone, the way men of that generation offered comfort without lingering. Your father was a good man, Henry said, and they worked hard to beat him. That's not a reflection on him. That's a reflection on them. Edgar nodded once. He picked up the page and placed it with the others. When Sutton gets here, he said, this is the first thing I show him. Sutton arrived before Louise did. He came from the North Road, not the South, which meant he hadn't passed her on the way, which meant either she'd taken a different route or he'd already been riding before she reached him. He was a compact man in his 50s, with a gray beard trimmed close, and the kind of posture that suggested he spent a lot of time on horseback, whether he enjoyed it or not. He tied his horse at the post and knocked, and when Edgar opened the door, he looked at Edgar with recognition he had no reason to have. "You're Robert's boy," he said. "People keep saying that," Edgar said. "It's a compliment." Sutton stepped inside without being asked the way a man enters a space when he has business there and time is short. He looked at the papers on the table and looked at Henry and then back at Edgar. "Tom Bishop wrote to me 3 months ago," he said, "before he died. He sent me a summary of what he had and asked me if I could help." Edgar went very still. "He sent you a summary. 8 pages, enough to tell me the shape of it." Sutton sat down at the table and opened his own bag. "I've been waiting for someone in this county to contact me. Tom said there would be someone. He said he had a plan for getting the documents to the right person and that when it happened, they'd find me." He looked at Henry. "I wasn't expecting Henry Carver, but I'm not surprised." "It wasn't Henry," Edgar said. "It was Tom's cousin, Louise Bishop. She came from Colorado." Sutton went still. "Louise," he said. "Yes." Sutton put both hands flat on the table and was quiet for a moment. Then, Tom was very worried about Louise. He was afraid that if something happened to him, whoever had the documents would be in danger. He asked me. He stopped. He asked me if anything happened to him to find a way to protect her. The room was quiet. "He knew something might happen to him," Edgar said. "He suspected," Sutton said. "He was a careful man. He didn't say it outright, but the way he wrote it, yes, he knew the risk." He paused. "How is she?" "She's riding to Laramie to find you right now," Edgar said. Sutton almost smiled. "Then she'll be back by late afternoon, and she won't be pleased to have missed me." He pulled his papers out and spread them on the table beside Tom's documents. "Now, talk to me about the timeline. Pierce gave you until Friday." "Friday morning," Edgar said. "That's tomorrow." Sutton looked up. "That's not 3 days," he said. "No," Edgar said. "I miscounted last night. I was tired." He met Sutton's eyes. "We have until tomorrow morning." Henry made a sound that was not quite a word. Sutton looked at the stack of documents, and then looked at Edgar with an expression that had nothing of panic in it and everything of a man rapidly recalculating. "All right," he said. "Then we work tonight. Show me the lien filing first." They worked through the afternoon. Sutton read everything twice. He asked questions in short, precise sentences and wrote the answers in a notebook he kept beside him on the table, and Edgar answered everything he could and said plainly when he didn't know. Louise came back at 4 o'clock. She walked in the door, saw Sutton at the table, and stopped. "You were already coming," she said. "Tom wrote to me," Sutton said. He stood up. "Miss Bishop, I am very glad you made it here safely." Something crossed Louise's face fast and complicated the particular expression of someone who has been holding something heavy for a long time and has just been told that someone else already knew that someone else had been carrying part of it alongside them, without their knowing. It was not quite relief. It was something older and rawer than relief. "He knew it was dangerous," she said, not a question. "Yes," Sutton said. "He didn't tell me. He didn't want you to worry until you had to." Louise was quiet. She took her hat off and pressed the back of her wrist to her mouth for a moment, one moment only. Then she put the hat back on and came to the table. "What do we have?" she said. "Enough," Sutton said. "Possibly. The false lien is actionable. The fraudulent assessment revisions are actionable. The Gilmore connection. He tapped the page. This is what breaks it open. Gilmore filed federal land documentation in 3 of these cases. False federal documentation. That is not a county matter. That is a federal crime. Which means it goes above Sheriff Crane, Edgar said. It goes well above Sheriff Crane, Sutton said. There's a federal land agent stationed in Cheyenne, a man named Hargrove. I know him. He's honest, which in this territory is worth saying explicitly. He paused. I can have a wire sent to Hargrove tonight from Millhaven. If he moves fast, he can have a deputy here by tomorrow morning. Pierce is coming at first light, Edgar said. Then Hargrove's deputy needs to be here before Pierce, Sutton said. That's a very narrow window, Henry said. Yes, Sutton said. It is. Nobody said what everyone was thinking, which was that narrow windows closed fast, and people got hurt when they did. But nobody said the other thing either, that this was the only window they had, and they were going to climb through it regardless. I'll ride to Millhaven, Henry said. I know the telegraph operator. He'll send the wire tonight. I'm coming with you, Louise said. Louise? Edgar started. I have a statement to give, she said, about what happened in Colorado, about the Harlan Company's activities there. Sutton needs it documented tonight. Sutton nodded. She's right. Edgar looked at her. She looked back at him, steady, clear, already moving in her mind toward the next thing. Be back before dark, he said. Before dark, she said. They left Henry and Louise together, and the yard was quiet again, and Edgar and Sutton sat at the table with the documents spread between them and the last of the afternoon light coming through the window. She's remarkable, Sutton said. Yes, Edgar said simply. Sutton looked at him over the papers and said nothing else about it. They kept working. The trouble came at dusk. Edgar heard the horses first. Not one horse, not 2, but several coming fast from the south road, which meant coming from the Carver property, which meant coming from land Harlan already owned. He was at the door before Sutton could get to his feet. 4 riders. He didn't recognize 3 of them. The 4th was the large man who had stood behind Pierce on the porch that morning. They stopped at the gate. The large man looked at Edgar without expression. Mr. Pierce says to remind you the deadline is sunrise tomorrow, he said, and to tell you that the first document you signed is already on file in Cheyenne. Edgar went cold. What? He said. The first page you signed, the large man said. Day before yesterday. Mr. Pierce filed it when he got back to town, as a partial execution of intent. He paused, letting that sit. Mr. Gilmore says it may or may not hold up in court, but in the meantime it does create a complication for any competing claim. Edgar gripped the doorframe. Behind him, he heard Sutton's sharp intake of breath. The first page. The one he'd signed before Louise's wheel had cracked. Before he'd walked to the gate, and found her standing there assessing the situation without panic. Before everything. He had set the pen to the line and signed his name, and then looked up because of the sound, and he had left the papers on the fence post and walked away. He had never taken that first signature back. Is that legal? Edgar said. He wasn't asking the large man. He was asking Sutton, who had come to stand just behind him. It's arguable, Sutton said, low and careful. It shouldn't be. A partial signature with no witness, no consideration, no completed contract, it shouldn't hold. But it creates confusion in the record, and confusion is what they want. He paused. It's a pressure tactic. They're trying to make you feel like you're already half-trapped. The large man on the horse hadn't moved. He was waiting for Edgar's response. Edgar looked at him for a long moment. Tell Pierce, Edgar said, that whatever he filed, I will be filing more. Tell him a federal land agent has been contacted and will be here in the morning. Tell him... He stopped. He took a breath. Tell him, my father built this ranch on honest ground and I intend to keep it that way. The large man nodded, once turned his horse, and the 4 riders went back the way they came. Edgar closed the door. He stood with his back against it and his eyes closed for about 3 seconds. That was all he allowed himself. The federal filing doesn't change our case, Sutton said. Not fundamentally, but we need Hargrove here before Pierce arrives, or it gets complicated in ways I can't fully control. He paused. Did Henry and Louise get to the telegraph office? They should be there by now, Edgar said. Then we have to trust that they did what they went to do, Sutton said. And we have to finish what we're doing here. He went back to the table. Come on, we still have 2 hours of good light and a lot of pages left. Edgar pushed off the door and came back to the table. He sat down. He picked up the next document. His hand was perfectly steady, and this time it meant something entirely different than it had 2 mornings ago, when he'd put a pen to the line and almost given everything away. This time, it meant he had decided. This time, it meant he was not leaving. Louise and Henry came back as the last light was fading, and Louise's face when she walked in, the particular set of her jaw, the way she moved straight to the table and sat down and said, "The wire is sent. Hargrove will have it within the hour," told Edgar everything he needed to know about what the next few hours were going to require. "We should sleep," Sutton said. "In shifts. At least one person watching at all times." "I'll take first watch," Louise said. "You just rode 8 hours today," Edgar said. "I know what I just did," she said. "I'll take first watch." He looked at her. He let it go. "Wake me in 3 hours," he said. 3 hours, she said. He went to lie down and did not expect to sleep, and was asleep in 4 minutes. The deep blank sleep of a man whose body has decided that whatever happens next, it requires rest to face it. Outside in the kitchen, Louise sat at the table with Tom's documents in front of her and Sutton's notes beside them, and she watched the window and the door and the dark beyond, both steady and awake, the way she had learned to be in the years since she'd stopped being able to afford the luxury of assuming that the morning would take care of itself. The morning was coming fast. She intended to be ready for it. Louise woke Edgar at 3 in the morning, not because it was his shift, but because she'd heard something on the South Road, horses moving slow, trying not to be heard, which was exactly the kind of sound that meant someone was doing something they didn't want witnessed. Edgar was up and dressed before she finished the sentence. Sutton was already awake. The man slept like a soldier, alert to everything, and he came out of the spare room with his coat on and his bag in his hand, looking like a man who had anticipated this precise moment. "They're moving early," Edgar said. "Of course they are," Sutton said. "They want to be on your property and in position before Hargrove arrives. If they can present the partial signature to a county official before a federal agent gets here, they can muddy the jurisdictional question." He was already at the table, reorganizing the documents into a specific order. Edgar could see the logic of it, even without asking. Strongest evidence first. Federal violations at the top. "How many riders?" "2 that I could hear," Louise said. "Maybe 3. "Not enough to take the property by force," Sutton said. "This is still a legal play. They need your signature, Edgar. Without the full contract executed, the partial is just noise." He looked up. "Don't sign anything. No matter what they tell you that first signature means, don't sign." "I know," Edgar said. "Say it anyway. I need to hear you say it." "I won't sign," Edgar said. Sutton nodded and went back to the documents. Louise looked at Edgar across the kitchen. In the lamplight, her face was tired and composed, and he thought about the fact that she had stayed awake the entire 3 hours of her watch without complaint, watching the dark, and had woken him the moment something changed. "You should have woken me earlier," he said, "to take the watch." "You needed the sleep more than I did," she said. "That's not your decision to make." "I made it anyway," she said, calm, final, the way she made every decision. He looked at her for a moment. "Thank you," he said. She nodded once, and they went to work. Pierce arrived at 5:30 in the morning, 40 minutes before sunrise, with the large man at his side, and Sheriff Aldous Crane riding behind them. Crane was a man Edgar had known since childhood, a wide man in his 50s, slow-moving but not slow-thinking, with a star on his chest that had been there so long It seemed like part of his anatomy. He had always been polite to Edgar. He had also, according to Tom's documents, signed 4 fraudulent property assessment revisions in the past 18 months. Edgar opened the door before they knocked. Pierce looked at the 3 people visible behind Edgar Sutton at the table. Louise standing to his right. Henry Carver, who had come back before midnight and was sitting in the corner chair with his arms crossed, and his careful smile appeared and stayed. "Mr. Talbot," Pierce said, "I see you have company." "I do," Edgar said. "Mr. Sutton," Pierce said, looking past Edgar. His voice didn't change. "I wasn't aware you were involved." "I'm aware you weren't aware," Sutton said pleasantly. "Come in, Mr. Pierce. Let's finish this properly." Pierce came in. Crane came in behind him. The large man stayed on the porch, which Edgar noted. Pierce set his leather case on the table and opened it with the practiced ease of someone who had done this many times in many kitchens and always walked out with what he came for. "I have the partial execution document," Pierce said, "filed yesterday afternoon in the county record. Mr. Crane was kind enough to witness the filing." He produced it clean official with Edgar's signature on the first line and the Harlan Company seal in the corner. "All that remains is the completion of the contract. 2 more signatures, Mr. Talbot, and this is done." "That partial filing is not legally valid," Sutton said. He was still seated, which was deliberate. He was the calmest person in the room, and he wanted everyone to see it. "A single signature on an incomplete contract with no witness present, no consideration exchanged, and no notification to the signing party of the intent to file, that doesn't constitute execution under Wyoming property statute. You know that, Mr. Pierce." "Mr. Gilmore believes otherwise," Pierce said. "Mr. Gilmore's beliefs are about to become considerably less relevant," Sutton said. He placed one document on the table face up. Pierce's eyes moved to it. Edgar watched Pierce's face and saw the exact moment a small tightening around the eyes so quick most people would have missed it when Pierce understood what he was looking at. It was the federal filing. Gilmore's false documentation submitted to the federal land office. The crime that went above Sheriff Crane, above the county, above anything local that Pierce could manage or contain. "Where did you get that?" Pierce said. His voice was still level, but it had lost something. "Tom Bishop was a thorough man," Sutton said. Pierce looked at Louise. Something shifted in his expression that was harder than anything he'd shown before, not the careful smile, not the patient certainty. Something with an edge to it. "Miss Bishop," he said. "I don't know what your cousin told you, but, My cousin told me the truth," Louise said. "He wrote it down, and he signed it, and he sent copies to 2 different places, so that even if something happened to him, it would still exist." She took a step forward. "Something happened to him. It still exists." The room held that for a moment. Crane shifted his weight. It was the first movement he'd made since coming inside, and Edgar caught it, the discomfort of a man who has been standing on one side of a line and is beginning to recalculate which side is safer. "Aldous," Henry Carver said from the corner. Crane looked at him. "I've known you 20 years, Henry said. "You're not a bad man. You made some bad decisions because someone made it worth your while, and you told yourself it wasn't really hurting anyone." He paused. "But it did hurt people. You know that." He paused again. "It's not too late to stand on the right side of this." Crane's jaw worked. He looked at the document on the table. He looked at Pierce. Pierce was looking at the door. The sound came before the sight horses on the North Road. Multiple horses moving at a steady, purposeful pace that was different from Pierce's careful pre-dawn approach. This was the sound of men who were not trying to be quiet because they didn't need to be. 3 riders came into the yard. The man in front was wearing a federal badge that caught the first gray light of the coming dawn. Hargrove. He was younger than Edgar had expected, mid-40s, lean with a direct manner of moving that suggested he had not come all this way to have a conversation. He came through the door without being invited and looked at everyone in the room in about 3 seconds. "James Sutton," he said. "Hargrove," Sutton said. "Thank you for moving fast. Federal land fraud tends to focus my attention." He looked at Pierce. Denton Pierce. Pierce said nothing. I have a warrant for Calvin Gilmore, Hargrove said. Out of Cheyenne. My deputies are picking him up this morning. I also have a federal hold on all property transactions involving the Harlan Land Company in this county, pending a full audit of their filing records. He produced the warrant and set it on the table beside Sutton's documents. Nobody is signing anything today. The silence that followed was the particular silence of a room in which power has just shifted completely, and everyone is adjusting to the new weight of it. Pierce's hand moved toward his case. Don't touch the case, Hargrove said without raising his voice. Pierce's hand stopped. Crane looked at Hargrove, then at the warrant, then at Pierce. Then he took the star off his chest and set it on the table beside everything else. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The star on the table said everything. Aldous, Pierce said sharply. I'm done, Denton, Crane said. He sounded tired more than anything. Tired the way men sound when they've been carrying guilt. They told themselves wasn't guilt for long enough that they've forgotten what it feels like not to carry it. I'm done. Henry Carver in the corner chair let out a breath. Edgar looked at the warrant. He looked at Pierce's face, the careful smile gone now replaced by the expression of a man calculating exits and finding none. He looked at the first document he'd signed 2 mornings ago sitting in Pierce's leather case. Mr. Hargrove, Edgar said. Mr. Talbot. The first page of that contract, Edgar said, nodding at the case. The one I signed before I understood what I was signing. Is it binding? Hargrove looked at Sutton. Under federal review, it's frozen along with everything else, Sutton said. And I will argue successfully that a signature obtained under material misrepresentation of the property's value and encumbered by a fraudulent lien is not enforceable. He paused. It will take some months to clear completely. But no, it is not binding. Edgar nodded. He reached over and picked up the document from Pierce's case. Pierce's hand came up, but Hargrove was faster. One hand on Pierce's arm, and Pierce went still. Edgar looked at his signature on the bottom of the page. His name in his own handwriting on a document that had almost cost him everything his father had built. He folded it once, twice. He carried it to the stove and opened the fire door and put it in and watched it catch. Nobody spoke. He closed the fire door and turned around. The Talbot Ranch is not for sale, he said. It was never legitimately for sale, and it is not going to be. Jemheim. Hargrove took Pierce and what remained of his operation out of the county before noon. Crane went with them under a separate federal inquiry that Sutton said would likely result in the man losing his badge permanently, and possibly more than that. 2 of Hargrove's deputies stayed in Millhaven to manage the audit of the county land records, and Sutton promised to have a formal complaint against Gilmore, documented and delivered to the federal office in Cheyenne by the end of the week. By mid-afternoon, the Talbot kitchen was quiet for the first time in 3 days. Henry Carver had gone home. He had shaken Edgar's hand at the door and held it for a moment longer than a handshake required, and Edgar had understood that the extra moment was for his father, for the 22 years Henry had known Robert Talbot, and for the apology he didn't have the right words for, and for the small measure of restoration that came from having shown up when it mattered, even if it was later than it should have been. Sutton had ridden back to Laramie with every document filed copied and accounted for, and had left Edgar with a clear outline of what came next. Months of legal process, an audit, a formal clearing of the fraudulent lien, and eventually, if everything held, a potential federal case against the Harlan Development Group that would reach far beyond Wyoming. It was going to be a long road. Edgar sat on the porch steps and thought about that. About long roads and whether he had what was needed to walk them. Louise came out and sat beside him. Not close a foot of space between them, which felt like the right amount. She had her coffee cup in both hands, and she looked at the south field the way she'd been looking at this ranch since the first morning, like something she was calculating, measuring, estimating the potential of. You have good soil under the dry top, she said. I looked at it this morning while you were talking to Sutton. The drought damage is surface level mostly. A good season of rain and the right grass seed, and you'd have grazing land again within 2 years. You looked at my soil, Edgar said. I'm a rancher, she said. I look at soil. He almost smiled. He let it happen this time. What are you going to do now? He asked. She was quiet for a moment, looking at the field. Tom's boarding house plan was real, she said. He'd already put a deposit on a building in Mill Haven. I could see it through, probably. It's a reasonable business. She paused. It's also not what I'm good at. What are you good at? She looked at him sideways. You know what I'm good at. He did. He'd watched her for 3 days. He'd watched her assess a broken wheel without flinching, sleep in her clothes, without complaint, ride 8 hours in a day without being asked twice, read a fraudulent land filing, and understand its implications in 5 minutes, and sit watch through the dark hours without anyone telling her it needed doing. He knew exactly what she was good at. This ranch needs work, he said. I noticed, she said. The fences need rebuilding on the west side. The cattle stock is down to almost nothing. I'd need to buy young stock and start over. The barn roof has 2 bad sections. He paused. It's not a small undertaking. No, she said. It isn't. I can't pay much, he said. Not right now. Not until the land clears legally and the ranch starts producing again. That's 2 years, maybe 3, before there's any real money in it. Louise looked at her coffee cup. I'm not looking for wages. Edgar, she said quietly. The word sat between them for a moment. Not heavy. It had already been implicit in everything that had happened between them since a wheel cracked on a road that nobody used, and she'd stood there without flinching, assessing the situation. Louise, he said, I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer me plain. I don't answer any other way, she said. No, he said. You don't. He looked at her. Would you stay? She met his eyes. I was thinking about staying, she said. I was thinking about how I don't actually want to run a boarding house, and how this soil is better than it looks, and how your fence line needs a person who knows what they're doing, and how I haven't felt like I was in the right place since my husband died and my ranch went, and I've been moving from one wrong place to the next for 3 years. She paused. And then I was thinking about you. What about me? Edgar said. I was thinking that you're the kind of man who signs his name to something he doesn't want, because he thinks he has no other choice, she said. And I'm the kind of woman who drives a wagon alone from Colorado because she refuses to accept that something is over when it isn't. She looked at him. I think that makes us useful to each other. Just useful, he said. She considered. For now, she said. Ask me again in a year. He looked at her. This woman who had come to him by accident, or by something that felt like more than accident, who had put her hands flat on his kitchen table, and her eyes on his problem, and her whole capable self into the business of not letting him give up what his father had given him. All right, he said. I'll ask you in a year. You better, she said. She went back to her coffee, and he looked at the south field at the dry grass moving in the wind over soil that she'd said was better than it looked. Over the creek he couldn't see from here but knew was running, always running, even in the worst of it. He thought about his father standing in this yard 30 years ago with nothing but raw land and the will to build something on it. He thought about how that something had almost been taken from him by men with leather cases and careful smiles and arithmetic they hoped nobody would check. He thought about a wheel cracking at exactly the right moment on a road that went nowhere, and a woman standing in the dust without panic assessing the situation, ready to work. Some things break at exactly the right time. Some things hold because the right person showed up and refused to let them fall. The Talbot Ranch had nearly died with its debts and its dry summers and one man's grief. It had survived because a woman from Colorado, with a broken wagon and her dead cousin's documents, had pulled up to its gate on a morning when the sale papers were already on the fence post and the pen was already in the owner's hand, and had changed the calculation entirely, the way honest people change calculations when they arrive with the truth and refuse to leave until it is heard. Edgar Talbot did not sell his father's land. He rebuilt it, board by board, and fence post by fence post, and head of cattle, by slow-growing head of cattle, and he did not do it alone. And the Talbot Ranch stood for another 40 years, and everyone who knew the story knew exactly whose hands had saved it, and they were not only his.